Thank you, young ladies. Really, truly inspirational, special moment. We are going to welcome back onto the stage our incredible editor-in-chief of Glamour magazine, who has made this all possible. Well, give it up for Cindi one more time, y'all.
Give it up for Uzo. Does she need her own talk show or what? Can we make this happen? Come on. So, we've danced, we've cheered, we sang along to Freedom, that was awesome, and we've heard from some amazing women. But I really believe this. Women can't truly succeed without men who believe in us and share our vision of equality. Good guys who are really going to have our back and want what's best for us. They do exist. And we're lucky to have one of those upstanding guys here with us today, U.S. Senator Cory Booker from the great state of New Jersey. He's going to share a little bit of his story with us, and then we're going to bring back Yara, and then they'll answer a few of your questions together. But first, here's your Cory Booker 411. He studied at Stanford and Oxford and got his law degree at Yale. He could have taken, I know, la-di-da, he could have taken some fancy law firm gig, but instead, he lived in the projects in Newark, became a tenants' rights lawyer, ran for city council, and eventually became mayor, determined to rehabilitate the city he loved. Now, as a U.S. Senator, he's fighting to improve schools on a state and federal level. He also, fun fact, happens to be a vegan, animal-loving former football player who loves sci-fi and Pixar cartoons. Senator Booker has 3.5 million Twitter followers, and apparently he was shocked to discover that iPads weren't allowed on the Senate floor, and he got right to changing that rule. This senator is a fierce defender of our rights, all our rights. Women, people of color, immigrants, the incarcerated. Too many politicians are all talk. Senator Booker is all about action. Please welcome Senator Cory Booker. Hi. Have fun.
Hello, everybody. Hello. So I can feel the energy in this room. You guys are incredible. I am so grateful to be here, and I have to say I'm very excited to meet Yara in a few moments and have her interview me, but I thought I would share with you all a little bit about why I look at you and I feel a sense of hope and possibility for our country and really what some of my journey was. Now, I'm a kid that grew up in New Jersey. I'm very proud of that. Some Jersey in the house, I see. And, oh, all right. Newark. Okay, now my heart is really breaking. Well, so I had parents that grew up in the South. They grew up during the Civil Rights Movement and were raising my brother and I to understand that, hey, your life is not defined by your personal accomplishments, but by your willingness to do for other people. And so by the time I was finishing law school, my parents were teasing me. They're like, oh, son, you got all these degrees and stuff like that. You got to actually do something with your life. It's not about studying all the time. And so I took my law degree and I decided to move into the city that I love, that I lived there for the last 20 years, into Newark, New Jersey. But I decided actually to look for a neighborhood that was struggling, to find a neighborhood where there were a lot of challenges. And I moved on to the south end of Martin Luther King Boulevard in Newark in the 1990s. Now at this time, when I moved there, it was a tough neighborhood. There was lots of crime. I would hear gunshots at night. In fact, when I was moving my stuff in, I went up to my room to move my stuff into this apartment I was renting, or this room I was renting. I came back and my stuff was stolen, and I was just like, gosh. And I ended up moving across the street from a place called Brick Towers. It doesn't even stand there anymore, but you know what I'm talking about. These two high-rises, low-income housing, eventually public housing. And in the time I was living there, there was an abandoned building next to me where people would go and use drugs, and I was just overwhelmed by the challenges on the streets. And here I was, still a law student, and thinking to myself, this is how I want to make a difference, but I just couldn't get over the challenges. Now, it was around this time that somebody told me, if you're gonna make a difference in this neighborhood, you gotta meet the tenant president in this building. And what I found in Newark is that so many of the great leaders in our grassroots were always these powerful women who many times were the strength that kept blocks and buildings and neighborhoods together. And so I go up, this young law student with a little bit of swagger and self-importance, and I knock on her door, and I hear this like voice. It sounds like a linebacker. It's like, "Who is it?" And I go, "It's Cory Booker." And I felt like I was somebody special. I'm like, "It's Cory Booker." And the door opens, and I'm looking like 6'3", thinking it's gonna be this giant of a person. And then it's just this woman, this elderly woman, about 5 feet and a smidgen tall. And I'm like looking at her, and little did I know, this was one of the most powerful people I was about to meet in my life. And you know, I always say I got my BA from Stanford University, but my PhD in the streets of Newark. And this was the person that was my best professor. And she looks at me and she goes, "What do you want?" And I explained to her, "I'm Cory Booker, I'm here to help you." And she looks at me like I was some kind of John Wayne riding on a white horse. "You think you're gonna help me?" She gave me this look like, "You're the one that needs help, young man." And we talked for a while, and then she did something. She says to me, "If you really wanna help me, follow me." And so next thing I know, she grabs me and she says, "Come downstairs." She locks her door. We walk down 5 flights of stairs in this big building. We walk through the courtyard, through the steps, and onto the middle of Martin Luther King Boulevard. And she wheels around and she looks up at me and she says, "If you want to help me, you got to tell me what you see around you." And I'm like confused. I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And she goes, "If you want to help me, describe what you see." And I said, "Okay, well, I see an abandoned building. I see graffiti. I just described the neighborhood just like I described it to you. A place with challenges, problems, I described it." But the more that I was talking, the more angry this woman looked. And she started shaking her head. And finally, when I finished, she just says, "You can't help me." And she turns around and she starts walking away from me. And I'm so confused. I run after her. I grab her from behind, very respectfully, mind you. And I said, "What are you talking about?" And then she looks at me, and even though I'm like much taller than her, she looks at me and she says, "Boy, you need to understand something. The world you see outside of you is a reflection of what you have inside of you. If you're one of those people who only sees problems and darkness and despair, that's all there's ever going to be. But if you're one of those stubborn people who every time you open your eyes, you see hope, you see possibility, you see love, you see the face of God, then you can be one of those people that helps me." And she walks away from me. And I was just standing there looking at her walk away from me, looking at my feet, thinking to myself, "Okay, grasshopper, thus endeth the lesson." Well, I started to come back to her apartment. I came correct this time. I left my ego aside. And I just looked at her and started learning from her. Literally, I would just sit in her apartment and watch as people would come to her apartment with lots of issues in the community, in the neighborhood. I watched how she found ways to help people out no matter what. Sometimes she would lecture and scold them. She wasn't easy. But if somebody needs some help with the rent or fighting with the slumlord, I watched how this was a center of action. How her and other tenant leaders, almost all women, would sit together and plan and plot about how they were going to fight for their community and their building. Eventually, I got my law degree and I started helping them as their lawyer. And literally, she started to raise me up in my life of activism. It was her that was one of the people that made the decision about what I was going to do. I still remember the conversation I started having with her. She started talking about how bad City Hall was and how she felt there needed to be a change. And they started talking, "Yeah, we need to run somebody for city council." And before you knew it, she was pointing at me and says, "We're going to run you for city council." And I'm like, "Well, that's not my plan. I'm going to be a lawyer. I've got a fellowship. It's a 2-year fellowship." And Miss Jones was like, "What are you here for, boy? You here to help the community, or are you here to do what you want to do?" And I said, I'm here to help the community. And she was one of these people that helped me realize that life is about purpose. It's not about position. A lot of us are going to have lots of different jobs, but the most important thing is having a purpose in your life. And that purpose, you're going to find positions are going to come and go. And in fact, she was one of those people that helped me understand that sometimes it's not always easy going after something that might not have immediately thought to be something that you wanted, but to take a chance, to take a risk, to jump into the unknown. And I've come to learn that the definition of faith that I have is that when you come to the end of all the light you know, and you're about to step into the darkness, faith is knowing one of the two things is going to happen. Either you're going to find solid ground underneath you, or the universe will send you people who will teach you how to fly. And so Miss Jones was one of those people. She helped me. I got elected. I won an election, becoming the youngest person ever elected in my city at a municipal level in my 20s. And then, don't applaud, because I get this job as a city council person and everything goes wrong. I mean, I'm not getting anything done. I'm this young person. There are people on the council 30, 40 years older than me, and they're not letting me pass anything. And the mayor of the city is making my life so difficult. In fact, he was ticketing my car everywhere I parked and when I parked with the other council people. And I just couldn't believe how hard this was getting. I couldn't make a change. I couldn't make a difference. And then one day, after a year of just frustration and thinking I made a mistake getting into politics, I get a call from the northern part of my city, the area of the city I represented, in a place called Garden Spires. And the tenant president there, another older African-American woman who was just a powerful leader, calls me up and says, "Cory, you got to get up here. It's like the Wild Wild West. There just had to been a violent incident, shooting." She's like, "You got to do something." And I'm like, "I don't know what to do." She's like, "Well, get the police out here." And I'm like, "I can't get the police to stop ticketing my car. How am I going to get them up there?" And so she starts getting angry with me. "Well, why did we elect you in the first place if you can't do anything?" And I kept giving her excuses that I couldn't do anything, that I was powerless, that I was in this office, but I couldn't get anything done. And we start arguing with each other, and finally, I was raising my voice at my elder. And before you know it, my anger and my frustration for not being able to get anything done was coming out on her, and before you knew it, we hung up on each other. And now I am angry. I leave City Hall, and I'm walking back to the where I was living now, in the brick towers and these buildings, and I get out of my car, and there is the last person I want to see, because all I wanted to do was to get to my room and hang out in a sensual embrace with my two buddies, Ben and Jerry. And I am walking right to my buildings, and I see the person I don't want to see, and that is Miss Virginia Jones. Now she, again, is this leader of these buildings, standing outside like a sentinel, surveying her territory. And I decided I got to get past this woman. I do not need any of her wisdom right now. I just want to go home. And so I start walking past her, and I just grumble at her. "Hi, Miss Jones." And I walk past, and she just let me walk past her. And then when I get about 4 or 5 feet away, she goes, "Don't you just walk past me, boy." And I stop in my tracks, and I swing around. I'm angry. And then she just like looks at me, and she reads me real quick and decides how she's going to deal with me. And she goes, "Come over here and give Miss Jones a hug." And I'm just like, oh. And I walk over there, and I hug her insincere, you know, like when you break up with somebody and you say you're just going to still be friends, you know. And I let go, and she goes, "Now tell Miss Jones what's wrong." And I'm like, "You want to know what's wrong?" And she's like, "Yeah, tell me what's wrong." And I just unloaded on her a year's worth of frustration. Why did I get into politics? I couldn't make a difference. Nothing was changing. I was so angry. Then I told her about the problems in Garden Spires, that there was violence up there in the community. There was problems they were having, and I didn't know what to do. And I must have repeated it 3 times. "I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do." But the 3rd time I repeated it, suddenly Miss Jones goes, "Oh," like she had gotten some insight, and I stopped talking. She goes, "I know what you should do." And I'm excited. Maybe she does have an answer to my problems. And I'm like, "What should I do, Miss Jones?" And she goes, "Yep, I know what you should do." And I'm like, "I heard you the first time. What should I do?" And she crosses her arms. She thinks for a second. She goes, "Yep, I know exactly what you should do." And I'm like, "Miss Jones, what should I do?" And she looks at me and she goes, "You?" And I lean a little further forward. She goes, "You should?" And I go, "Yeah, yeah." And she goes, "You should do." I'm like, "Yeah." And she goes, "You should do something." I'm like, I'm like, what? She goes, you should do something. And I get so angry, I explode. I swing right around and I storm to my buildings. And I don't know if you all know this. I think God has dominion over the earth, except for maybe one place, which is public housing elevators, because they never work. And so I hike 16 flights. I sit down and I'm about to give up. I'm done. I want to quit politics. I'm angry at the world, angry at Ms. Jones. And then I'm thinking for myself for a second. And I still remember there was this Bible there, and I opened it, and it says something in there like faith the size of a mustard seed. You can move mountains. And then it said something else about fasting and prayer. And I started thinking about it, meditating on it. And I thought to myself, oh, I can't stand Ms. Jones. She's right. I hadn't really tried. And so I sat there and thought for a second, what am I going to do? And an idea came to me, and I called up my aide, and I said to him, let's get a tent. And he's like, what? And I said, let's get a tent. And we got this big tent, and we set it up right at Garden Spires, right where a lot of the drug trade was going on. And Elaine Sewell, the tenant president, comes out, and she sees what we're doing, and I walk up to her, and I apologize to her. And say sorry for disrespecting her and raising my voice. And literally, she just hugs me. She doesn't even let me finish my apology. And there may have been some tears on my part. And then I say, look, I don't know what I'm going to do about the problems here, but I'm going to do something. And I said, I'm going to bring a tent here, and I'm going to live in that tent till we figure something out. And I'm going to fast. I'm not going to eat any food. And I'm wondering if you'll do something. Would you pray with me every morning? And she agrees, and then I decide to do something that politicians are really good at. You guys should learn this. I held a press conference and told this to the United States of America. How can we have places where people live in fear? And next thing you know, we camp under the tent. The first night was really difficult. About 4 or 5 of us were sleeping there. People were throwing things off the top of the building. They were upset that we had just lay out in the middle of their territory. But the next morning I wake up and these big guys come to the tent and they go, are you Cory Booker? And I go, yeah. He goes, well, we saw you on the news. We're correctional officers. We're not going to let you stand out here alone. And next thing you know, during that day, dozens of people were coming out to the tent. Community leaders and neighborhood folks all saying, hey, if you're going to be out here, we're going to stand out here with you. By the next day, more people came out. The next day, you suddenly had hospitals coming out to do health screenings for the community. You started having job companies, UPS and others, setting up and doing job fairs. People started donating computers to the rec room. Before you knew it, hundreds and hundreds of folks were coming out. Some guy from over here in New York saw us on the news and sent like 50 pizzas out to feed everybody, which I was really angry about because I was on a hunger strike. But by the 10th day of us being out there, the mayor of the city came out. And this was my adversary, but you know what? After 10 days of praying with the community, standing with the community, doing everything from gospel concerts, I didn't see him as an enemy. I saw him as just another human being. I still remember he had these prepared remarks as if he was going to give some speech, but me and the mayor just hugged. And I remember hugging him close. I had never touched him before. I never hugged him in that way. And I remember smelling him and thinking, God, he smells just like members of my family. And the mayor turns around and says, we're taking down this tent because I'm going to bring police out to this community and I'm going to build a park right here. Now, the end of the story is not that great because the mayor brought police out. They stayed for a while, but eventually the police left and problems came back. He never built a park like he promised, and it would take about 10 years later till I became mayor and I built a park. But that's not the reason for the story. That's not the reason for the story. Really, what I want to end with is this simple moment. We all decided when the tent came down, we were going to pray. And it was amazing that you had about 200-300 plus people standing in a circle. And what was great there is there were believers and non-believers. There were young folk and elderly folk and middle-aged folk. There were black folk and white folk and Latino folk and Asian folk. There were rabbis and imams and priests and ministers. And as we all held hands, it was one of the weakest I'd ever felt physically, 10 days of not eating solid food. But when I held hands in that circle, it was the strongest I had ever felt in my life. And as I looked at that scene of America around me, I realized that this is what is strong about our country. And as I heard people speaking in Spanish and in Arabic and in Hebrew, I started to hear the words of our country ringing in my ears. Whether it was the words of an old African parable that says, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. Whether it was the words of a wonderful Hebrew phrase, Ki beiti beit tefillah l'chochomim, may my house be a house of prayer for all nations. I heard the ideals of a minister named Martin Luther King who said, we are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality tied in a common garment of destiny. And I heard 3 words from a dead language that are the hallmark of a young country. Those simple 3 words, e pluribus unum, out of many the one. Miss Jones lived to see me be mayor of the city and helped me get to where I am today. Because she knew 2 things. She knew 2 things very powerfully. One is that all of us have the power to transform our communities if we're willing to do something. And standing for our country and standing for our community, standing for each other, that is powerful. But when we find ways to join together with others, that is a force that can truly transform the world. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Booker. How great was that? That was wonderful. So we're going to welcome Yara Shahidi back out to the stage. Here's a little warning, mostly for you. The last time I moderated a conversation with Yara, it was Yara and First Lady Michelle Obama.
Nice to meet you.
And Yara so impressed Michelle Obama with her poise and her intelligence, you're in the middle, while we were on stage, that Mrs. Obama offered on the spot to write her a college recommendation, which I think she did, correct?
Yeah.
That's pretty awesome.
So girls, always show your stuff. That's the moral of that story. Do you 2 know each other, by the way?
This is our first time.
Actually meeting, but I'm a fan.
Yeah.
It is mutual. This is exciting for me. Thank you very much.
You watch Blackish?
I do watch Blackish religiously.
Thank you.
And I found out last week you could sing. You got a really good
Oh,
voice.
goodness. That episode was interesting because they surprised us. They were like, guess what? You're singing and dancing. And I was like, this is what I do in the shower, but not in public. But it went well.
It went really well. I was really impressed.
All right.
you.
So we're going to take some questions from the audience, and I want to start with Narissa. Hi, Narissa. Narissa is here from Girls Inc., as you can see from her T-shirt. Take it away.
Yeah. Hi, Yara. Hi, Senator Booker.
Can you tell me where you're from?
I'm from.
Do you live in New York? Do you live in New Jersey?
I'm from New York. I'm from Brooklyn originally.
You're from
Grew
Brooklyn.
up in Queens.
And you grew up in Queens. Fantastic.
This question is for you. Can you tell me about some of the improvements you've been making in our schools that are keeping girls like me on track for college?
Wow. So in my work as a mayor of Newark, I did a lot of work in our schools, and I'm really proud of the gains my young people in Newark have made. Graduations have gone up, rates have gone up dramatically. In fact, if you're an African-American kid in Newark, from the time I was mayor till now, your chances of going to a high-performing school went up 300%. And so on a citywide level, thanks to a lot of work of a lot of people, Newark schools have really been moving, and I've learned a lot of lessons. But now on the federal level, now I'm a U.S. Senator representing the whole state of New Jersey, and frankly, I try to work on behalf of kids all over our country. We really have a crisis in our country when it comes to education, because the most valuable natural resource America has in a global knowledge-based economy is not oil, it's not gas, it's not coal, it's the genius of our young people. And genius is equally distributed. There's many geniuses born in Brooklyn and Newark and Patterson as there are in Beverly Hills and other wealthier neighborhoods that often have better access to high-quality schools. And they have access to things that often help you achieve better. Like there are still millions of Americans that don't have access to broadband and the internet. There are still kids growing up in environments like in many New Jersey schools where they can't even drink the water coming out of the water fountains because there's lead in it, which directly affects kids' learning abilities. And so I fight for lots of things on the federal level, from trying to get young people better access to the internet, to trying to deal with the environmental issues that often undermine kids from learning, and something I really push is to try to get more young girls access to STEM education, science, technology, engineering, and math.
Yara, I want to ask you about education too, because I think, you referenced Beverly Hills. I think sometimes there's a misconception that, like, listen, if you're an actress, you don't need your education, and you have very passionately said that you believe otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I've been acting my entire academic career, and I've wanted to go to college longer than I've wanted to be on a show. I kind of tripped into it, which was a lucky accident. But I mean, I was in kindergarten asking my grandfather to be my roommate when I go to school. Wow. So I was planning ahead. But yeah, when I started Blackish, it was during my sophomore year of high school, and I started to look into other programs just because I was at an all-girls school, and it was just the distance caused a bit of a fracture. Love the all-girls school, always repping Immaculate Heart. And I think what was interesting was when I was looking at a lot of programs, there were non-collegiate routes, which meant by the age of 14, you were to have made the decision that college was not in your future. But more than that, that meant if you decided by the age of 17 or 18, when you got to senior year, that it was something that you wanted to actually do, you didn't have enough credits for it, nor the ability to get credits without taking extra classes, which could have easily taken I don't know how long. And so I was doing 20 hours of schoolwork on the weekend and easily 4 to 5 hours of school after I'd get back from work. But it was so worth it because I love school and I am a proud nerd and geek, and it was just so fulfilling because I think history is why I enjoy acting and literature is why I appreciate storytelling. And so it really did motivate everything else that I do.
So can I ask you that, because I joke all the time that I got into Stanford University because of our 4.0 and 1600, 4.0 yards per carry, 1600 receiving yards. I got in on a football scholarship. And it was very interesting to me, having what equated to a full-time job playing football and having to do college. And it takes a tremendous work ethic. And it just sounds like you had to do what a lot of your peers weren't doing in order to advance in school.
Yes and no, in that what I realized is that even though being an actor, it's a very niche thing to be like, I was acting during high school, but when I started to talk to a lot of my friends, we were enduring a lot of the same things, whether it was I have friends that were in sports while they were in school, or were really active within their community while they were in school. And many times, even school itself is like juggling a full-time job. And so as specific as my situation seemed, it was actually fairly universal in just how much work we're putting in to keep up in school and to excel.
I think we have another question here from Anisha. Hi, Anisha.
Hi, I'm Anisha. With Choose the First here.
All right.
And my question is
And do you live in Brooklyn or Manhattan, or do you have the grace of living in New Jersey?
Sorry, I'm a New Yorker.
Sorry.
I'm from Brooklyn, but I live in Staten Island. And my question
Which
is
is kind of New Jersey anyway. I mean, come on.
Watch it.
I strongly disagree. But my question is for Yara, and I was just wondering, how do you prioritize supporting an issue globally versus locally when, especially with girls' education, when there are girls in the United States that don't have an education?
That's a interesting question. I think part of it comes from, one, again, my love of history. I'm half black, half Iranian, and so I have family globally. Selfishly, that means I would love to help people globally. But I think also what's been ingrained in me from a very young age from my family is the idea that we rise together. And so there is this idea that national boundaries basically dictate who we should care for and who we should care about. And even this idea that the structure that we live in tells us that our success basically depends on somebody else's failure in order to prove that I have been successful, versus erasing this idea that my success is tied to nothing else but the success of the people around me and my ability to help contribute to said success. And I think because of that, that's why I'm so passionate about helping everyone globally, because it isn't just a states issue. Yes, it is a big states issue, but girls worldwide don't have access to education. Girls worldwide are going through the same problems, and there's nothing more powerful than realizing how similar we are and the power of our numbers.
You must get, Senator Booker, you must get versions of that question frequently yourself too. Why invest overseas when there are so many pressing needs here?
Well, Yara said it. I mean, there's an illusion of separateness in many ways that we create, where we don't understand that our destinies are far more interwoven than we understand. And there's programs that I fight for in the State Department that fund the health in countries far and wide. But health crises don't understand borders, and often we saw this with things like Ebola or Zika, that they threaten humanity, they don't threaten us. But I think even more importantly, the point that she's making is, there's a great philosopher who once said, love of country is a wonderful thing, but why should love stop at our borders? And we have to understand that our humanity is deeply invested in the dignity and humanity of others. And if the dignity and humanity of others is being undermined, it actually is, by us doing nothing, it's a reflection of our own dignity and humanity. And so I just believe that the opposite of justice is not injustice. The opposite of justice is inaction and indifference. And so right now on the planet Earth, we're seeing something that we've never seen before. There are levels of refugee crises going on our planet that we've just never seen this many people having to flee their homeland. And as much as attention is given to Syria, which is a real crisis, we're having more of a refugee problem in the Congo than we're having in Syria right now. And in fact, there are famines. We have 4 major famines going on the planet Earth right now, from Somalia to South Sudan to Yemen. And so for me, for us as Americans, to only be looking inward and not understanding the crisis that humanity is facing, it is if we do that, it is more a mark of who we are as a country than we come to realize. And so my hope for everybody here is that we don't look at the world, and sometimes we allow our inability to do everything to undermine our determination to do something. And just by taking a journey, and I'm doing this myself, of trying to be more conscious, it might even be something small, like understanding that where does the clothing I buy come from, and how might it be participating in the oppression of people far away from me? Or what about the food that I eat? And I was meeting with some activists in North Carolina yesterday, and most people don't understand this, but because of the billions of animals that are necessary just to feed America, we're losing miles and miles of rainforest just to clear land to raise these animals. But in America, I was in a low-lying area in North Carolina called Duplin County, a traditional African-American community. But because we have to kill so many pigs in our country, these industrial animal agricultural groups have located in these low-lying, traditionally African-American areas. And because pigs, most people don't know this, I'm sorry you didn't think we'd be going there today, but we're going here. Pigs produce 10 times the effluents that human beings do. And so they have nowhere to put it because it would literally poison our rivers and our lakes if we just let that run off. So they create these massive lagoons. So just picture me in North Carolina in this traditionally black area looking at these spray fields where they take these lagoons full of pig waste, spray them on the fields, and I watch the mist from the spray carry into black communities. And so I met with these activists who can't open their windows, who can't run their air conditioning, have respiratory diseases and cancers, all because they've located these things in their areas. And again, what can I do to stop that? Well, I'm a United States Senator, I might be able to do more, but you can think consciously about, well, before I make a decision to buy things that are contributing to the pain and suffering of others, maybe I can make more responsible decisions, because the most common way we vote in America is actually not at the election box, but we vote with our consumer choices every day. And so our little bit of being more enlightened, and then sharing that enlightenment in ways that generations past couldn't. Hey, posting on Facebook, hey, did you hear about the crisis down in North Carolina in these communities? You actually expand consciousness. And I'll tell you right now, there are so many people right on Madison Avenue, marketers, who are really trying to clue in right now to what you all are thinking in your age bracket because of the consumer power you have. And so just by becoming more woke to a lot of these issues, you can shape what society is doing and actually change industries and industry practices to bring more justice to people in faraway places like North Carolina.
Oh, fascinating. We have another question from the audience, but Senator Booker, first I want to ask you a question just tied to what's been happening sort of in the headlines this week. And I ask it as both a woman and also as the mother of a 14-year-old daughter, not too much younger than a lot of the girls in this room. You gave back campaign donations that had been given to you by the producer Harvey Weinstein after allegations of sexual harassment and assault came out against him this week. And we know, obviously this is not a new topic to be in our headlines. Even the president had bragged last fall of sexual assaults on tape. And you're a man in a position of power. I worry about the message, I'm sure I'm not the only one, that this sends to girls and young women about what men expect of them and what rights they have to stand up and be heard. And I wonder if you, on behalf of men in power, if that's a role you're willing to play, can talk to these girls about what their rights are and what they should make of the stories they might be reading right now.
So, I mean, this is so reprehensible, but one of the things that sort of bothers me about this story, first of all, I'm happy it's coming out, and God bless the courage of many of the women who are willing to speak out about it. But if we start acting when we see horrific moments like this, as if this is some anomaly and not still a major problem in our society, then I think we fail to motivate the necessary energy to stop it. And this goes in areas of harassment, all the way to issues of, I was telling a group today that things like Flint, Michigan, we get all excited about it, which is rightful, but it's not. There are 1,000 jurisdictions in America with kids with lead poisoning in their blood greater than this. But this is a major issue in our society when it comes to sexual assault, sexual harassment, and it's far more prevalent than we know. And the way we often deal with survivors of sexual assault is horrific to me in this society. I visited a women's prison recently, a federal prison in Danbury, Connecticut, and this amazing warden, as I'm walking in, and I asked her how many women here are victims or survivors, rather, of sexual trauma. And she stops, and this tough professional suddenly looks very vulnerable to me, and she looks at me and she goes, I think about 95% of my women. We incarcerate women who have been victims of sexual violence or survivors of sexual violence. And if we don't start admitting how prevalent this is in our society, I don't think we're going to get the momentum necessary to stop it. So to your specific question as to the young women who are here today, I just want you to know that it's painful for me to say as a man to be able to say to you that somehow you're not going to experience overt sexism or not necessarily experience harassment in your lives. And my hope is that you have the fortitude and the strength, which I know you do, to reject it, to not accept it, to call people out, to raise your voice, to demand things change. And it's tough. And I know it because it often doesn't happen with these powerful Hollywood figures. I mean, come with me to the IHOP on Bergen Street, which some of you know, and talk to some of the servers who we have a society where their tips are dependent upon the people that they're serving. And people feel entitled to make remarks and comments. Just listen to servers and what they often have to endure. So we have to be a collective force, all of us, in condemning this kind of behavior and saying that in our generation, or in this case your generation, that we're going to change this reality and make it absolutely unacceptable that anywhere in our society we see such harassment. And then I hope, going back to the prison, is that we can be a society that is far more attuned to people who are victims of the worst types of sexual assault, men and women, because we seem to be taking people that often need help, that need counseling, that need treatment for trauma, and we unfortunately don't provide that in this country, and see people spin to points where they're actually getting caught up in our criminal justice system, and that's wrong as well.
Thank you, Senator. We have time for one more quick question from Johnny from Plan International USA. Hi, Johnny.
Hi.
You know the drill. Tell us where you're from.
Okie dokie. I was born and raised in Washington, D.C. I attended boarding school in New Jersey.
Which boarding school?
The Petty School.
The which school?
The Petty School.
Yes.
In Central New Jersey.
Yeah. Well, finally, some Jersey cred comes out.
Yeah. No,
there's a serious bias towards New York Westerns in this room.
No, I love New Jersey.
Do you love New Jersey?
Yeah. No, I'm going to school there for 4 years. Definitely changed my opinions.
And are you? So you're out of high school. Are you in college now?
Yeah. So I'm taking a gap year. I'm going to be attending Barnard College at Columbia University.
Oh, congratulations! Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yes.
Great. So my
and
question.
what do you hope to study?
Political science.
Political science.
Yeah, international relations.
That was my major. And what do you want to do when you come out of college?
I hope to go to law school.
Then law school.
Yeah.
And do you ever want to like intern in the United States Senator's office or something?
Yeah, let's get in contact. Yeah.
So
No, definitely.
I mean, as a poli-sci major, that would be exciting.
Yeah.
And so we have an intern process, and being that you have some nexus to New Jersey, why don't you write down some information and give it to me, and we can see what we can do.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Amazing.
I mean, I have to tell you, first of all, I miss Obama a lot, so I want to preface
Don't we all?
and I miss her husband too, and I just felt like I was being outdone by Michelle Obama writing a recommendation for Yara. This is like, so I've got to at least try to have a connection. You're already going to college for crying out loud, and you're going to do graduate school at Rutgers. Ask your question.
Yeah, no, I got it. So again, hi, Senator Booker. Thank you so much.
We got past that already.
Right? But again, I think you're absolutely amazing and an inspiration. And we all want to know whether or not you'll be running for president in 2020. Right? Yeah. But I am even more curious to know, Yara, will you be running in 2036?
That's the better question. Did you say 2024 for Yara?
No, 2036.
Oh, I was about to say, because she's got to be 35 years old. The Constitution
Yeah.
has stipulated her age.
We did the math.
I don't feel the competition from her right now because she's got some years to go. So, future president?
I describe what I describe what I want to do in the future as policy adjacent, but I don't know exactly what that is. But I do have to say that I'll be of voting age 2018, which means I can vote for you in 2020. And I was wondering how many people will be of voting age by 2020 so we can vote for him.
If you're in New Jersey, you definitely can vote for me. So I'm going to end by saying this again. What I learned from Miss Jones, life is about purpose and not politics. And this is the problem I often find with people who have political aspirations, is that they're so focused on my life goal is to be in a position that then they end up being all about keeping that position as opposed to sometimes doing what's right. And sometimes doing what's right is not always going to be popular. And so that's why I get back to life is about purpose, not popularity. It's about significance, not celebrity. And so I just want to be somebody that stays authentically myself. And if that means that to run in a primary in Iowa, I can't talk about the problems with industrial animal agriculture, and that might zero out my chances of winning votes if I'm going to be talking about CAFOs and things like that, then so be it. I missed that opportunity. And I've been able to get to where I am because of trying to be as fiercely authentic as possible. And that's what the world needs. It doesn't need any dull carbon copies of what already is. It needs you, your unique genius, your unique talent, your unique skill. There was a great political leader who once said, everyone is born an original, but sadly most die copies. And my hope for all of us here is that we never die a copy, that we stay fiercely aligned to our authenticity and our calling and our definitions of what's great. And I want to echo something because Yara manifested something to me that is really important that I learned just from studying success. And I began doing that as a teenager because I was really intimidated at Stanford that I had gotten to that school under false pretenses and that I couldn't compete. And it's one of the worst things that you can do is to allow yourself to be swallowed up by insecurity, because then you fail before you even start to believing that you don't belong someplace or believing that you can't compete. And Yara manifested a lesson that was really something I had to teach myself by studying other successful people. I started really making on the football field, I studied the best wide receivers, but then I got to the classroom and I said, you know what? I didn't do as good in school as these other folks, didn't do as well in school, but I'm going to study the people that are really smart. And I started realizing that they had two things that had nothing to do with intellect. One is they had really good habits, and the other one is that they had a really good work ethic. And I've learned in my life that there's really no limits to what you can do, if you're willing to manifest those two things. Like I found the smart kids would show up early for class, they would sit in front. I found out they would go to the professor's office hours to get to know the professor and discuss material with them. They didn't feel like they had, that professor, you're literally paying their salary with your tuition, so you should get them. I heard smart people I saw that if a paper was due on the 14th, they would finish it by the 7th and hand it to the TA and say, this is my rough draft. Can I get some other advice on it, on how to make it better? And literally the TA would start telling me how to change a B paper into an A paper. And so I've just learned in life that if you want something, you really have to decide. In fact, one of our great African-American women poets said, if you want to fly, you've got to give up the stuff that holds you down. And to be willing to sacrifice something for the things that are important for you. And sometimes that's being a carbon copy, doing what everybody else does. I learned that on Thursday nights, people start partying in college. And I'm like, I could do what everybody's doing and get the results everybody's getting, but I was born to be different. So I'm going to go to the library while other people are out partying and put in more hours than they are, because my goal, my purpose for being here is to achieve the goals that I set for myself. So I'm impressed. Before you, don't applaud for me, applaud for her, because Yara clearly is someone who's making sacrifices and showing discipline, but this is the trifecta. This is why I admire her so much from afar, and now I'm kind of close. But this is what I admire, is that we're all called to be really successful, but again, what I told you earlier, the definition of success my parents taught me is when you become someone that people know or is well known, define your success by your willingness to be an advocate, be an activist, by your willingness to serve, because we swear this oath every time we're in school. You do it a lot. You make an oath, you swear a pledge that this country is going to be one of liberty and justice for all. Well, it's not. Those are aspirational words. And if you're going to swear that oath, you have to understand that my obligations is to make the best out of myself, but also to figure out ways to make this country and this planet live up to the promises of humanity through service and through contributions to others. So thank you, Yara, for being that model.
Thank you. My absolute favorite James Baldwin quote is basically what you just echoed, when it says, around the age of 5 or 6 or 7, you realize the flag that you pledged allegiance to along with everybody else did not pledge allegiance to you. And so I just am enamored by your work that makes this pledge more inclusive of the people who are actually doing it, and I am so inspired.
Thank you very much.
Thanks to both of you. I can't think of a better note to end this conversation on. Senator Booker, Yara, thanks so much for this great talk. And stay tuned, because we've got the State Bags team coming out right here, right now.
That was so good.